3 days. No reply. The blue check mark sits there like a verdict. You read the message again. You didn't say anything weird. You think you didn't say anything weird. The 3 dots appeared once, last Tuesday, and then they didn't. Nothing since. Your stomach knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. It feels less like mild disappointment and more like a low physical alarm. A door closing somewhere you can't see. And here's the strange part. You know, logically, that this is a stranger from an app. Someone you've met twice. Someone whose last name you're not even sure you remember correctly. And yet, your body is reacting like something far more serious just happened. This is the story of why that reaction isn't an overreaction at all. It's a 50,000-year-old alarm system, built for a world that no longer exists, going off exactly the way it was designed to. Ghosting feels disproportionate because your brain isn't measuring the relationship, it's measuring the silence. And to the oldest part of your nervous system, silence from the group has only ever meant one thing. Let's start with the story we usually tell ourselves about it. The common version goes like this. Ghosting is just rudeness. A character flaw, someone too cowardly to send a 2-line text, so they vanish instead, and the rest of us are left to manage the wreckage of someone else's avoidance. That's the explanation that fits neatly into a group chat. Simple villain, simple diagnosis. But here's the first crack in that story. If ghosting were only a matter of someone else's bad manners, the sting wouldn't last as long as it does. Bad manners, a rude waiter, a cut-off in traffic, annoy us for minutes, maybe an hour. Ghosting can sit in your chest for days. Some people report thinking about it for weeks, replaying the last messages, searching for the sentence that broke it. That's not the profile of an etiquette violation. That's the profile of something your nervous system has flagged as a threat. So when did this actually start? Not with apps, not even close. Go back further than agriculture, further than cities, further than written language. Go back roughly 200,000 years to the early populations of Homo sapiens moving across the African savanna in small mobile bands. Anthropological research on hunter-gatherer societies, both ancient remains and surviving populations studied in the 20th century, like the Kungsan of the Kalahari, suggest these groups typically numbered somewhere between 25 and 50 people, sometimes fewer. In a group that size, you knew everyone. There was no anonymity, no fresh start 2 valleys over. Your survival, your food, your protection from predators, your odds of finding a mate, your odds of someone helping you when you were sick or injured, depended entirely on staying inside that small circle of mutual obligation, which means exclusion from the group wasn't a social inconvenience. It was, in the most literal sense, a death sentence. A lone human on the Pleistocene savanna, without the group's shared vigilance, shared food, shared defense, that person's odds of surviving a single season dropped sharply. Think about that for a second. For nearly all of human evolutionary history, being cut off from your people and being killed were functionally the same outcome. Your brain never had a reason to evolve a separate, milder response for minor social distancing. There wasn't a minor version. There was only the big one. Here's where the evidence gets specific. Because this isn't just a tidy evolutionary story. It shows up in the brain itself. In 2003, psychologist Naomi Eisenberger and colleagues published a now famous study in the journal Science. They had participants play a simple computer game called Cyberball, a virtual game of catch with 2 other players, while inside an fMRI scanner. At a certain point, the other 2 players stopped throwing the ball to the participant. No insult, no confrontation, just exclusion. The brain scan showed activity spiking in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, a region also strongly activated by physical pain. Being left out of a game of digital catch with strangers for no stated reason lit up the same neural circuitry as a physical injury. That's not a metaphor anymore. That's not your brain being dramatic for effect. That's your brain running social exclusion through the same threat detection system it uses for bodily harm. Because for most of our history, the two were entangled. Being pushed out of the group could, eventually, get you hurt or killed. The brain didn't bother building a separate alarm for the social version. It just routed it through the one it already had. And if you've ever described a breakup or a ghosting as something that physically hurt, turns out you weren't being poetic. You were being anatomically accurate. But here's the catch, and it's worth sitting with honestly. We cannot run an fMRI scan on a Pleistocene hunter-gatherer. The brains we're studying are modern ones, shaped by modern environments, even if the underlying architecture is old. What researchers actually have is a chain of inference. The neural overlap between social and physical pain in present-day humans, combined with anthropological data on how lethal isolation was for small band foragers, combined with the fact that this sensitivity to exclusion shows up across virtually every human culture studied. Regardless of how individualistic or collectivist that culture is, it's a strong case. It is not a recording of an ancient brain in action. The honest answer is we don't know exactly how this circuitry first emerged, or precisely when in our evolutionary timeline it sharpened into its current form. And we probably never will, because there's no fossil for an emotion. What we have is the strongest available explanation that fits the pattern, not a verified transcript of how it happened. So let's bring in a second, separate strand of evidence, because the social pain alarm doesn't appear to be uniquely human. Researchers studying wolves have long noted that lone wolves, animals separated from their pack, whether by choice or by being pushed out, face dramatically higher mortality rates than wolves operating within a pack structure. They're less successful at hunting large prey, more vulnerable to rival packs, more exposed during harsh winters. The pack isn't just companionship, it's the entire infrastructure of staying alive. Primatologists, including Frans de Waal in his long-term studies of chimpanzee communities, have documented something similar in our closer relatives. Lower-ranking chimps who fall out of favor, excluded from grooming circles, denied access to food sharing, socially isolated by a shift in alliance, show measurable increases in stress hormones. Cortisol climbs, behavior becomes more anxious, more vigilant. A wolf without a pack and a primate without a coalition are both, in a very real sense, running the same calculation your stomach runs when a message goes unanswered for the third straight day. The math is ancient, and it's not exclusively ours. And once you start looking, the same pattern echoes in places you wouldn't expect. Consider formal religious shunning, the Amish practice known as Meidung, where a member who breaks community rules and refuses to repent can be cut off entirely from interaction with family and neighbors. Sociologists studying these communities have noted that this isn't treated as a minor social consequence. It's described, by members themselves, in terms close to bereavement, a kind of social death that precedes physical death. Or consider the much older Greco-Roman practice of ostracism itself, the word's literal origin. In ancient Athens, citizens could vote to exile a person from the city for 10 years, using broken pottery shards, ostraca, as ballots. No crime needed to be proven, just enough collective will to push someone out. Different eras, different continents, different technologies. And the same underlying tool keeps reappearing. Control a person or punish them, not through violence, but through removal from the group. That's not a coincidence. That's a species repeatedly reaching for the lever it knows works, because the lever is wired directly into the nervous system. So why would evolution build something this sensitive, this disproportionate almost in the first place? Psychologist Mark Leary proposed an answer in the mid-1990s called sociometer theory. The idea is that self-esteem itself isn't really a measure of how much you like yourself. It's a gauge, a sociometer, constantly, unconsciously tracking your standing in the group. Low self-esteem isn't a flaw to be fixed. It's an alarm bell, evolved specifically to fire before exclusion happens, so you'd have time to repair the relationship before you were actually cast out. That reframes the whole experience. The anxious spiral after a ghosting, checking the chat again, wondering what you said wrong, replaying the conversation, isn't neurosis. It's the sociometer doing exactly what it was built to do, scanning for the social rupture, trying to find it, trying to fix it, before the group finishes the job. That's not weakness. That's an early warning system with nowhere left to send its warning, because the person on the other end of the silence isn't a tribe member who can be reasoned with. They're a stranger who's already left the conversation entirely. Here's where it actually plays out in daily life. Because this mechanism didn't stay theoretical, it shaped how humans built their institutions. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar's research in the 1990s proposed what's now called Dunbar's number. The idea that humans can realistically maintain stable social relationships with roughly 150 people, a figure he derived from correlating primate brain size with typical group sizes across species. That number shows up again and again across human history, in the typical size of Neolithic farming villages, in the structure of military companies, in the size of religious congregations, and even modern corporate divisions. 150 seems to be roughly the ceiling of who your brain can actually track as part of your people. Now place that number next to a modern dating app. Your ancestors had a dating pool of maybe 2 or 3 dozen viable people, total, across their entire mating age window. You, swiping on a phone, have access to a pool that can run into the millions. Every match is processed by the same fret and belonging machinery built for a world of 30 faces you saw every day. The system was never upgraded for scale. It's still running tribe-sized software on a species-sized population. That's not a wider dating pool. That's a sociometer being asked to do calculus with a tool built for counting on fingers. And this is where it turns darker. Because scale doesn't just overwhelm the system. It cheapens the act of exclusion itself. In a small ancestral band, casting someone out had weight. It required confrontation, consensus, the discomfort of looking another person in the eye and ending something. There was friction built into the act, and that friction served a purpose. It made exclusion costly enough that it was usually reserved for real transgressions. A screen removes that friction completely. Ghosting someone today costs the ghoster almost nothing. No eye contact, no group consensus, often not even guilt, because the interaction can be framed as simply fading rather than ending. The asymmetry is brutal. The person doing the leaving experiences something closer to mild inconvenience, while the person left behind experiences something the brain is wired to register as existential threat. It's not that humans became crueler. It's that technology stripped away the one thing that used to make casting someone out hard to do lightly. So, what does all of this actually add up to? It means the wave of dread after a seen message with no reply isn't a personal failing. And it isn't proof that something is wrong with you specifically. It's an alarm built for life or death stakes, firing in response to something that, to your conscious adult brain, is genuinely low stakes. A stranger from an app deciding not to continue a conversation. The alarm doesn't know the difference. It was never built to know the difference. It was built before the concept of a stranger from an app could even exist. That's not a flaw in you. That's a 50,000-year-old smoke detector going off because someone burned toast 2 rooms away. The system is working exactly as designed. The world it was designed for is simply gone. There's still a piece of this we don't fully have an answer for, and it's worth naming honestly rather than smoothing over. Nobody can say for certain why some people seem to feel this alarm far more intensely than others, even within the same culture, the same upbringing, similar life experience. Attachment style, early relationships, individual neurochemistry, all likely play a role. But the honest answer is that the full picture of why your particular nervous system fires this loudly, while someone else's barely registers a flicker, is still genuinely unresolved. Some of it may simply be the ordinary variation that exists in any trait shaped by evolution. Not everyone's smoke detector is calibrated the same. So go back to that message, the blue check mark, the 3 dots that appeared and vanished, the silence that's been sitting there for 3 days. It still feels like a verdict. It probably still will, the next time. But underneath that feeling is something much older than the app, older than the phone, older than language itself, a piece of biological machinery built in a world where being forgotten by your people meant you didn't survive the season. You're not checking your phone because you're insecure. You're checking it because, for most of human history, checking on your standing with the group was the single most useful thing a person could do with their attention. The tribe is gone. The alarm never got the memo. And maybe that's the quiet, strange comfort in all of it. The ache you feel over someone you barely knew isn't proof you're too sensitive. It's proof you're descended from people who needed each other enough to feel it when they were gone.